Here's this week's edition of the Phillies Mailbag. You can find weekly the Mailbag at our website, 973ESPN.com. And, of course, every Tuesday at 2:30, Frank Klose is in with the answers to your questions. Listeners' questions get answered by Frank every week inside the Phillies Mailbag. You can send him a question at Frank Klose with a K on Twitter. And we bring in Frank for this week's edition of the Mailbag, where the Phillies, week 2 of the Grapefruit League. They had the off day yesterday. They play in action today. And let's start off, Frank, with a question from Mike. He wants to know about Brock Stassi, who has been ripping the cover off the ball. Does he have a legitimate shot to make the Phillies 25-man roster?
Well, guys, I think this is his last chance in some ways. 27 years old. He's a little bit old for a prospect. But he's going to get the opportunity this spring to really show that he belongs. And the Phillies are doing him a big favor by letting him play some outfield in the spring. Because if you think about who's going to fit on your roster, as a left-handed first baseman, that's not very versatile in terms of taking up a roster spot on the bench. You really want somebody who's a little bit more versatile. So Stassi is playing some outfield. He's playing some first base. There's a few things that actually work to his advantage. One of them is that Howie Kendrick is your left fielder. Howie Kendrick can jump over to second base or third base even if the club is in a pinch. So Stassi really, if you look at his competition, he's competing with Daniel Nava, the longtime Red Sox utility player, and Chris Coghlan, either of whom are first basemen. And if you look at Tommy Joseph, the one question you still have about Tommy Joseph is how well he can hit against tough right-handed pitching. So having somebody who can play some first base and bat left-handed is something the club could really, really use. And Coghlan and Nava, they both have some experience at first base, but Stassi's a more natural first baseman. But for him to make the club, he's going to have to be a little bit more versatile. And hopefully playing the outfield can do that. And, I mean, so far what we can see of him in the outfield is his arm is not that great for an outfielder, but he could be passable. I mean, Aaron Altair is likely the club's fourth outfielder, and he's a very solid defender at all three positions. So the answer is really yes. And I think what's going to have to make the case for him is going to be his bat this spring. Nava and Chris Coghlan, they've had a lot of experience in the major leagues already. So if he can out-hit them and show that and give the club confidence that he can hit major league pitching, not just tear the cover off the ball against, some relievers that are going to start in Double-A, I think he's got a real opportunity here to either say he belongs in the major leagues, or it could be the time when the Phillies sort of decide that he does not belong in the major leagues.
Frank, do you see a platoon at first base with Joseph, or will the Phillies give him a chance to prove that he can hit right-handed pitching?
I think the Phillies are going to give him the first opportunity to play against right-handers every day. I think they're going to go into the season where he's your number 5 or number 6 hitter. What they might do is flip-flop him and Saunders depending on what side of the mound that the opposition is throwing from that day. But I think they're going to give him a chance to show that either he can hit against right-handers or he can't hit against right-handers. So I don't think the platoon will come right away. I think if down the line, as time goes on, if they want to give him a day off, it probably would be against a tough righty. But in terms of a straight platoon, I think they're going to just sort of let him loose and see if he can hit against righties as well as he can hit against lefties, because that's something that Tommy Joseph has pretty much shown in his short time in the major leagues, is he has no trouble hitting against lefties. The tough righties that he didn't face last year when Ryan Howard was playing, that's something he's going to see for the first time, and he's going to get the opportunity to show that he could do that.
Hey, Frank, was Stassi a guy that the Phillies had hoped for? I mean, is he a late developer? Was he a guy that fizzled out? I mean, what's his story?
Well, 2 years ago, he was the Eastern League MVP, and they gave him a shot in spring training last year, and he really just was not prepared for the major leagues. And some guys do develop late, but when you think of it in terms of the high school player who gets drafted, has a lot more time to cook than somebody coming out of college. So if you play the full 4 years of college, you're really not getting into a system until 22 years old sometimes. So I think he was in that category. And, he played pretty well. I think he's shown he can hit in the minor leagues. And last year, he got off to a little bit of a rocky start at AAA. Not terrible. And I think down the stretch he showed he could hit a little bit better. So I think the Phillies saw enough that they want to give him this opportunity to show he belongs. He's not so much a wild card in that, he has to hit 700 and for the whole spring training in order to actually get a look. I think he's played well enough and he's gotten their eye enough that he gets this look, which is something not a lot of 27-year-olds are going to get.
Talk with Frank Klose. Check him out on our website, 973ESPN.com, with the Phillies mailbag. Zach has a question about Jeanmar Gomez. Do you see him being the starter, the closer to start the season off with a short lease, or do you think there is an open competition currently going on in Clearwater?
Well, Phillies manager Pete McCadden, he sort of said that nobody's job is locked down, but at the same time, he also said that the job really belongs to Gomez. I think having a veteran there is going to help them in a number of ways. And granted, we all saw Jeanmar Gomez struggle a little bit down the stretch. He probably was worn out a little bit too much throughout the course of the season, But I think if you look at his career, he's shown that, he's going to pitch probably every 3 innings he pitches, he's going to give up 1 run. And that really worked for the Phillies last year because he was able to protect a lot of 1-run leads and 2-run leads, which a team that doesn't score a lot of runs is going to give you a lot of opportunities to do. So I think they're okay with that, and I think they still want to see which of their young arms is going to eventually settle into that position. Hector Neris certainly did a nice job last year, and he did get a couple save opportunities down the stretch when Gomez was struggling a little bit. He's somebody they're still very high on. Edobre Ramos is somebody that they're still very high on, who we got to see a little bit at the end of last season. And then beyond that, you have Alberto Tirado, who was acquired in the Ben Revere trade a couple years ago with Toronto Blue Jays, who they also think is a very promising relief-type arm. So I think the Phillies want to let those guys develop on their own. There's also the financial advantage. Very interesting offseason for Dellin Betances of the New York Yankees. He was arguing he deserved closer money, even though he wasn't a closer. Once you start making somebody the closer, then even in the arbitration years, you're going to be liable for big money. So I think it's in their best interest to sort of let that work itself out down the line. And if you have a veteran like Gomez, you can throw him out there for now. And even though they didn't get a whole lot of trade interest in Gomez's past deadline, I'm sure they're ready to listen again this trade deadline, even though, unlike 2016, Gomez does not have an extra year of control. This is his last year of control with the Phillies. So they'll probably let the veteran go out there, try to make it as stable as possible. And I think that if Gomez struggles down the line, that's when they would turn to somebody like Neris or any of the other bullpen arms like the Joaquin Benoit. I have trouble saying that this season. Joaquin Benoit and Pat Neshek are going to get some chances.
Spell it like Benoit. Frank Klose is with us talking about the Phillies bullpen. So, Frank, if you had Pete McCannon's cap on, which guy do you think is the best option for that closer job? And you mentioned a few names there, so how do you see the Phillies' back end of the bullpen lining up? How do they stack up in your mind if you were making the call?
I would try to work Neris towards the back. I wouldn't necessarily give him the 8th inning. Neshek and Benoit have a great track record as veteran relievers. I think the Phillies are going to try to cluster the two of them and around the 7th, 8th inning and Gomez in the 9th. But as you saw last year, the bullpen arms were getting a ton of work. And I think with the young starters, there's still going to be a lot of games that the starters are coming out after the 5th and 6th inning. So you really need a lot of depth. I would put the veterans towards the back, get Neris some chances, though, at the same time. But in terms of the left-handed arms, we really don't know who they are just yet. And, I kind of personally have high hopes for Adam Morgan being a solid pen lefty. I think with his velocity and movement, I think he has the tools to be an effective left-handed reliever. And Yoelis Rodriguez has an opportunity to claim one of those left-handed spots. But really nobody has been anointed the left-handed arm in the pen yet. So it's really kind of hard to put that together. But I would try to, if I were the Phillies, I would try to get the veterans, the high leverage inning. There's still their arms you might possibly move at the trade deadline, and they're going to create a sense of stability that you need in the bullpen there, especially when your starters are coming out 5-6 innings every time out.
How about your perspective overall on that bullpen? Because last year the bullpen was a surprise at times, and then they ran out of gas late. Do you think the bullpen will overall be improved this season?
Absolutely. When the season began last year, they kind of hoped David Hernandez would be a nice addition and perhaps take the closer's job. Dalier, Hossa, they had high hopes for him too. Now Hernandez is gone, and Hossa is off the 40-man roster, although he's in camp, and they were really relying on those two for those last innings. And the likes of James Russell, who was a minor league signee last year, pitching as a lefty, Daniel Stumpf, Elvis Arujo, they're all gone. And as we saw last year, especially the lefties really got lit up. So I think this year with the two veterans in Nishek and Benoit, there's going to be a much greater sense of stability there. And if Adam Morgan really does take to the left-handed reliever role and we really do see the best out of him, I think there's a real chance that this is a nice stable bullpen in 2017. And again, probably towards the trade deadline, they'll look to maybe move one or two of those arms and let more of the young names rise.
Frank Klose is with us, 97.3 ESPN.com, at Frank Klose with a K on Twitter. Frank, who has a bigger impact, Howie Kendrick or Michael Saunders? That's from Brian on 97.3 ESPN.com.
At this point, I would think they're about even. Both are, one's a lefty, one's a righty. They're both keeping very, very different roles on the club. But I think they kind of perform the same function, which is to kind of to serve as a veteran bat who can create a real sense of stability. Now, Kendrick's going to be at the top of the lineup, probably batting second, from the right side, and then Saunders probably bats sixth from the left side with a little bit more power. But what you're going to see here is both of them are a lot better than having to play Cedric Hunter and Peter Borges in your opening day lineup. And generally last year, you had the likes of Borges, David Lowe, you had Cedric Hunter, Emmanuel Burris. They're all down at the bottom of the lineup, and 7, 8, 9 was just a wasteland of a lineup. And so adding those two veteran arms gives you a sense of stability. Freddie Galvis, who had power at times and struggled to get on base, but he can hit eighth. So you're going to be a lot better off. I don't think either one in particular is going to give you a jaw-dropping performance, but what I think you're going to get from them is you're going to get a solid bat from each of them. The other players, the younger players in the lineup, are really going to get to function in their roles, and they're going to be a lot stronger.
Frank, give me a guy so far, just 2 weeks in, who has been a surprise, whose name has been mentioned. I know we talked about Stassi. Is he the guy? Is there somebody else who's opening eyes that might make the Phillies look a little harder at?
Yeah, they don't have a lot of room. I guess it's a problem at this point. People have raved about Scott Kingery's bat and his glove at second base. Now, Kingery probably actually starts the season at Double-A Reading, of all places. But I think he has left a very big impression upon the Phillies coaching staff and the fans that have been there to see him, that this is a guy that could be a legitimate major league second baseman. Now, I think some people went a little overboard calling him the next Chase Utley and items like that. He's going to be a second baseman, but I think he's somebody that, even though he's not ready to come up immediately, you might see him later this season, or perhaps even next season. He could be the opening day second baseman. So
he's got a lot of Utley mannerisms, doesn't he?
Yeah, and a lot of his defense, he's very smooth and he hustles, and so I can understand why people would call him the next Chase Utley, but that's a pretty high standard to put on the guy. So
we're always looking for the next, right? We're always looking for the next guy.
Right.
Well,
but you know what? Maybe being the first Scott Kingery is a great thing.
We'll see. Phillies in action in Clearwater, of course, all month. We'll have the Phillies mailbag every Tuesday with Frank. You can send him questions for next week's mailbag at Frank Klose with a K. That's Klose. And you can check out Frank all the time at sportstalkphilly.com. And, of course, read his stuff on our website, 973ESPN.com. All right, Frank, I know the young one's probably waiting for you to get back to their attention.
That's right.
The newborn is in. All right, Frank, take care. Frank Klose, everybody.